I opened my front door that Tuesday morning to find Brenda Patterson standing on my porch with her arms crossed, her pursed lips forming a thin line of disapproval that had become all too familiar in the 6 months since she had taken over as president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association in Asheville, North Carolina. Behind her, a man in a tan uniform held a clipboard and looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Mr. Walker, this is Officer Chen from Code Enforcement," Brenda announced, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I've filed a formal complaint about those beehives in your backyard. They're a danger to the entire neighborhood and a clear violation of our HOA covenants." I took a slow breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Good morning to you too, Brenda. Officer Chen, I'd be happy to show you my beekeeping setup. Everything is properly licensed and maintained according to state regulations." Officer Chen nodded politely. "I appreciate that, sir. I'll need to conduct an inspection, but if you have the proper permits, we can clear this up quickly." Brenda's face flushed red. "Permits don't matter when there's a safety issue. Mrs. Henderson 2 doors down is allergic to bee stings. What if one of those things attacks her?" "Honeybees aren't aggressive unless provoked," I explained, keeping my tone even. "And I've had these hives for 3 years without a single incident. The hospital relies on the honey I provide for their wound care program." "Oh, please," Brenda scoffed. "You're just trying to make yourself sound important. Running a business from your home is another violation, by the way." Officer Chen cleared his throat. "Madam, if I could just inspect the property first before we discuss potential violations." I stepped aside and gestured toward the backyard. "Come on through. The hives are positioned against the back fence, well away from neighboring properties." As we walked through my house, I explained my setup to Officer Chen. "I maintain 4 hives currently. I started beekeeping after my wife passed away 3 years ago. She was a nurse at Mission Hospital, and one of her colleagues mentioned they were looking for local honey suppliers for their medical-grade honey program." Officer Chen made notes on his clipboard. "Medical-grade honey? It's used for wound dressings and treating certain infections," I said. "Raw, unpasteurized honey has antimicrobial properties. The hospital processes and sterilizes it for medical use. I provide them with about 40 pounds every month during peak season." We stepped into my backyard, where my 4 white Langstroth hives sat in a neat row against the privacy fence. The sound of thousands of bees humming filled the air, a peaceful drone that I had come to find meditative. The hives were surrounded by flowering plants I had carefully selected to provide year-round forage for the colonies. Officer Chen walked around the area, maintaining a respectful distance. "You've got them pretty well situated here. How far are they from the property lines?" 25 feet to the side fences, 30 feet to the back. North Carolina law only requires 10 feet, but I wanted to be extra cautious. The hives face southeast, so the flight path takes them up and over the fence into the wooded area behind the subdivision. Brenda had followed us but stayed near the back door of the house. "What about when they swarm? I've heard horror stories about bee swarms attacking people." "Swarming is a natural reproductive process," I explained. "It happens in spring when a colony splits. The bees are actually quite docile when swarming because they have gorged themselves on honey before leaving the hive. But I monitor my hives closely and perform splits before they get to that point. I haven't had an uncontrolled swarm in the 3 years I've been keeping bees." Officer Chen examined my setup more closely. "Do you have your permits and licenses available?" "Absolutely. Let me grab them from my office." I retrieved the folder I kept with all my beekeeping documentation, my state apiary registration, my business license for Walker Apiary, my liability insurance policy, and the contract with Mission Hospital. I also pulled out the letters of recommendation from the hospital's procurement department and the wound care center director. Officer Chen reviewed everything carefully while Brenda fidgeted impatiently beside him. "Everything appears to be in order, Mr. Walker. Your registration is current, you're in compliance with state setback requirements, and you have adequate insurance coverage. I don't see any code violations here." "What about the HOA covenants?" Brenda demanded. "We have rules about what residents can and cannot do with their properties." Officer Chen shook his head. "HOA covenants are a civil matter, madam. My jurisdiction is municipal code enforcement. As far as the city is concerned, Mr. Walker is operating legally." He handed my documents back to me. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir. I'll file my report and close this complaint." Brenda's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. This is ridiculous. I'll be taking this up with the HOA board. We'll see what the other homeowners have to say about having dangerous insects in their neighborhood. After they left, I stood in my backyard and watched my bees going about their work. Each hive housed between 40 and 60,000 bees during peak season, all working in perfect harmony. The hives produced far more honey than I needed, which was why the arrangement with the hospital had been such a perfect fit. I charged them a fair price, well below commercial rates, and they got locally sourced, high-quality honey for their medical program. My phone rang. It was Dr. Rebecca Patel from Mission Hospital's Wound Care Center. "Isaac, I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "Someone called the hospital today, asking questions about our honey supplier. They wanted to know if we were purchasing from a properly licensed vendor." I sighed. Let me guess. Middle-aged woman. Sounded very concerned about public safety. "You've dealt with her before, I take it?" "She's my HOA president. She reported me to code enforcement this morning. They came out, inspected everything, and found no violations. Now she's apparently trying to make trouble with the hospital." Rebecca made a noise of frustration. "Some people have too much time on their hands. For what it's worth, our procurement department verified all your credentials when we first contracted with you. You're one of our most reliable suppliers, and the honey you provide has been instrumental in several difficult cases. We had a diabetic patient last month with a wound that wasn't responding to conventional treatments. The honey dressings turned it around completely. I'm glad I can help. That's why I do this, honestly. The money is nice, but knowing the honey is actually helping people makes it meaningful. Well, if this HOA woman causes any more problems, let me know. I'd be happy to provide a formal statement about the value of your work." After hanging up, I went back outside to check on the hives. I suited up in my beekeeping jacket and veil, lit my smoker, and opened the first hive for inspection. The frames were heavy with honey, and the brood pattern looked healthy. The queen was doing her job well, and the workers had built beautiful straight comb. Beekeeping had saved me after Sarah died. Those first months had been unbearably dark, and I had wandered through life in a fog of grief. Then one day, I had been driving past a local farm store and saw they were offering a beginning beekeeping class. Sarah had always talked about wanting to keep bees someday. On impulse, I signed up. I discovered that bees demanded attention and care in a way that pulled me out of my own head. They operated on their own schedule, not mine. They needed regular inspections, feeding during dearth periods, treatment for mites, and constant monitoring. I couldn't afford to stay lost in grief when tens of thousands of living creatures depended on me. The first time I harvested honey, I had stood in my garage with frames of golden comb and cried. Sarah would have loved this. She would have been out there with me, probably getting stung because she would have insisted on inspecting the hives without proper protective gear, laughing the whole time. When her former colleague at the hospital mentioned they were looking for honey suppliers, it felt like everything had come full circle. Sarah's passion for helping patients could live on through something I was creating in my backyard. Over the next week, Brenda launched a campaign against my beehives. She sent letters to every household in Willow Creek, warning them about the dangerous apiary in their midst. She posted in the neighborhood Facebook group multiple times a day, sharing sensationalized articles about killer bees and allergic reactions. She even showed up at my door with a petition she was circulating to have the bees removed. "I've got 47 signatures already," she announced, waving the papers at me. "The special HOA meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday evening at the community center. You'll have an opportunity to address the board and the residents before we vote on whether to take legal action against you." "Legal action for what exactly?" I asked. "I'm not violating any laws or regulations." "The HOA covenants prohibit nuisances and hazards. Your bees qualify as both. Section 7, paragraph 3 clearly states that residents may not engage in activities that pose a danger to other residents or diminish property values." I had already reviewed the covenants with a lawyer I consulted after Brenda's code enforcement stunt. The covenants also protect agricultural activities. North Carolina has right to farm laws that protect beekeeping. "We'll let the board decide that," Brenda said primly. "I suggest you prepare a very good defense, Mr. Walker. The residents of Willow Creek don't take kindly to people who endanger their families." The following Tuesday, I arrived at the community center to find it packed. Apparently, Brenda's scare tactics had worked, and half the neighborhood had shown up. I recognized most of the faces, though I couldn't say I knew many of them well. I'd largely kept to myself since moving to Willow Creek 5 years ago. Brenda sat at a table at the front of the room with 3 other board members, Tom Schneider, the vice president, Linda Morrison, the secretary, and Gary Hughes, the treasurer. Brenda called the meeting to order and launched into her presentation. Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to discuss a serious safety issue affecting our community. Mr. Isaac Walker has been operating an illegal beekeeping business from his residential property in clear violation of our HOA covenants. Despite numerous complaints, he has refused to remove the dangerous insects from his backyard. She clicked through a PowerPoint presentation filled with dramatic photos of bee swarms, statistics about anaphylactic reactions to bee stings, and cherry-picked quotes from articles about Africanized honeybees. It was impressive in its level of manipulation and fear-mongering. Now, Mr. Walker will have an opportunity to address these concerns, Brenda said, her tone making it clear she expected my defense to be inadequate. I stood and walked to the front of the room, carrying a folder with my own materials. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak. I want to address the misconceptions and outright falsehoods in Mrs. Patterson's presentation. I pulled out photos of my hives and passed them around. These are European honeybees, Apis mellifera. They're the standard breed used in commercial and hobby beekeeping throughout North America. They're not Africanized killer bees, which are primarily found in the southwestern United States and are a completely different genetic strain. I showed them my permits and licenses. I'm properly registered with the State Department of Agriculture. I carry $2 million in liability insurance. I'm in full compliance with all municipal, county, and state regulations regarding beekeeping. What about people with allergies? Someone called out from the audience. That's a legitimate concern, I acknowledged. According to the CDC, about 7% of people will experience a large local reaction to a bee sting at some point in their lives, but only about 3% are truly allergic in a way that could cause anaphylaxis. My hives are positioned to direct the bees' flight path away from neighboring properties. In 3 years of keeping bees here, there has not been a single reported incident of anyone in this neighborhood being stung by one of my bees. I pulled out the letter from Dr. Patel. I want to share something that Mrs. Patterson hasn't mentioned. The honey from my hives goes directly to Mission Hospital, where it's used in their wound care program. Medical-grade honey is used to treat burns, surgical wounds, and diabetic ulcers. It has antimicrobial properties that help prevent infection and promote healing. I read excerpts from Rebecca's letter describing specific cases where the honey had made a difference in patient outcomes. The room had gone quiet. My wife was a nurse at Mission Hospital, I continued. She died 3 years ago from ovarian cancer. When I started keeping bees, it was because she had always wanted to try it. When I learned the hospital needed honey suppliers, it felt like her work helping people could continue through something I was creating. I provide the hospital with about 500 pounds of honey annually at below market rates. That honey helps dozens of patients recover from serious wounds. I looked directly at Brenda. So yes, I keep bees. I keep them legally, safely, and with full transparency. And those bees are literally helping save lives. If the HOA wants to take me to court over that, I'll defend my right to continue this work. The mood in the room had shifted. I could see people whispering to each other, reassessing. Brenda looked furious. That's a very touching story, Mr. Walker, she said icily. But it doesn't change the fact that you're operating a business from a residential property. That's explicitly prohibited in our covenants. Gary Hughes, the treasurer, cleared his throat. Actually, Brenda, I looked into that. The covenants prohibit businesses that generate customer traffic or require commercial equipment and signage. A home office or a small agriculture operation doesn't fall under that restriction. Otherwise, we'd have to go after everyone who works from home or has a vegetable garden they sell produce from. Brenda shot him a withering look. Those are completely different situations. How? Gary asked mildly. My neighbor sells tomatoes at the farmer's market from her garden. That's agriculture. This is agriculture. The scale is different, but the principle is the same. Linda Morrison, the secretary, nodded. I have to agree with Gary. I don't think we have grounds to force Mr. Walker to remove his beehives based on the business aspect. What about the safety issue? Brenda insisted. We have a duty to protect residents. Tom Schneider, who had been silent until now, spoke up. My uncle keeps bees down in South Carolina. They're actually pretty docile creatures if you leave them alone. And Mr. Walker's right about the flight paths. Bees fly up and over obstacles. If his hives are facing away from neighboring houses, the bees aren't going to be swarming around people's yards. A woman in the audience raised her hand. I'm Mrs. Henderson. Mrs. Patterson has been using my bee allergy as an excuse for this whole crusade. I want everyone to know that I've never had a problem with Mr. Walker's bees. I didn't even know they were there until she started her campaign. I carry an EpiPen because I'm allergic to wasp stings, but I've never been stung by a honeybee in my life. Another hand went up. I'm Dave Martinez. I live right behind Mr. Walker. Our yards share a fence line. I see his bees every day when I'm out in my garden. They mind their own business. They're more interested in my flowers than in me. I think this whole thing is blown way out of proportion. More people started speaking up, some in support of me, others still expressing concerns. Brenda tried to regain control of the meeting, but it had gotten away from her. Finally, Tom Schneider called for a vote. All in favor of taking legal action against Mr. Walker to force removal of the beehives? Only Brenda raised her hand. Opposed? Tom, Gary, and Linda all voted against the measure. It was defeated 3-1. Brenda gathered her materials with sharp, angry movements. This isn't over. I'll be consulting with the HOA's attorney about our options. Over the following weeks, Brenda made good on her threat. The HOA's lawyer sent me a formal demand letter claiming that my beekeeping operation violated the covenants. I responded through my own attorney, citing the right to farm laws and the lack of any actual nuisance or hazard. The correspondence went back and forth, each letter more aggressive than the last. Then things escalated in a way I never expected. I came home from the hardware store one afternoon to find all 4 of my beehives knocked over. The wooden boxes lay on their sides, frames scattered across the grass. Thousands of bees filled the air, their angry buzzing audible from inside my house. It looked like someone had taken a baseball bat to the hives, smashing several frames and killing who knows how many bees. I was furious and heartbroken. Each hive represented a living superorganism, a complex society of insects that I had carefully tended for years. The damage was catastrophic. I immediately called the police. Officer Mitchell arrived within 20 minutes. He surveyed the destruction with a grim expression. Any idea who might have done this? I have a pretty good idea, I said, pulling up the neighborhood Facebook group on my phone. Brenda had posted just an hour ago. If the HOA won't protect us from dangerous pests, maybe residents need to take matters into their own hands. Officer Mitchell photographed the post. That's pretty suggestive, but it's not proof. Do you have security cameras? No, I never thought I'd need them. I recommend installing some immediately. In the meantime, I'll file a report for vandalism and property destruction. You should document all the damage for insurance purposes. After the officer left, I spent the rest of the afternoon attempting to salvage what I could. I managed to get 2 of the hives reassembled with most of their colonies intact, though weakened. The other 2 hives had suffered too much damage. The queens were dead, and the remaining bees were joining the other colonies or absconding entirely. I called Dr. Patel to let her know I wouldn't be able to supply honey for the next few months while I rebuilt my colonies. Isaac, I'm so sorry, she said. That's absolutely horrible. Have the police identified who did it? Not yet, but I have my suspicions. Listen, I don't want to add to your problems, but I think you should know. Someone from your HOA contacted the hospital administration and filed a complaint about our procurement practices. They're claiming we're violating health and safety regulations by purchasing honey from an unlicensed vendor. My stomach dropped. What did administration say? They did an internal review and confirmed that you're properly licensed and that our procurement department followed all appropriate protocols. But this person has been relentless. They filed complaints with the health department, the agriculture department, and even contacted a local news station trying to get them to run a story about supposed safety violations. Let me guess. Brenda Patterson? She didn't give her name in all the communications, but the email address was brenda.patterson at willowcreekhoa.org. After we hung up, I sat in my garage surrounded by broken frames and dead bees and tried to decide what to do. I could let this go, take the loss, and quietly rebuild my hives, or I could fight back. I chose to fight. The next morning, I installed a comprehensive security camera system covering my entire backyard and the sides of my house. Then, I contacted my attorney and informed him about the vandalism in Brenda's online post. He advised me to file for a restraining order based on the pattern of harassment and the implied threat in her Facebook post. The hearing for the restraining order was scheduled for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Brenda's campaign continued. She filed a complaint with the Better Business Bureau against my apiary. She reported me to the IRS, claiming I was operating an unlicensed business and evading taxes. She even contacted my homeowner's insurance company, claiming I was engaged in a hazardous activity that should void my coverage. Each complaint was baseless, and each one required hours of my time to address. I provided documentation to the BBB showing I wasn't accredited because I didn't operate a consumer-facing business. I sent the IRS copies of my business tax returns showing I properly reported all income. I worked with my insurance agent to confirm that beekeeping was covered under my policy and that I carried additional liability coverage specifically for the apiary. But the harassment was taking its toll. I wasn't sleeping well, I was constantly anxious about what Brenda would do next, and I was grieving the loss of 2 of my colonies, representing years of work and thousands of dollars in equipment and bees. The restraining order hearing finally arrived. I sat in the courtroom with my attorney while Brenda sat across the aisle with the HOA's lawyer. The judge reviewed the evidence, the timeline of complaints and harassment, the Facebook post, the vandalism report, and the pattern of frivolous complaints to various government agencies. Brenda's lawyer argued that she was simply exercising her duties as HOA president to protect the neighborhood. My lawyer countered that her actions had crossed the line from legitimate advocacy into targeted harassment and had potentially inspired someone to commit vandalism. The judge took off his glasses and addressed Brenda directly. "Mrs. Patterson, I'm troubled by what I'm seeing here. Mr. Walker has demonstrated that he's operating legally and in full compliance with all relevant regulations. Your continued campaign against him, particularly the social media post that could be interpreted as encouraging illegal action, shows a reckless disregard for his rights and safety. I'm granting the temporary restraining order. You are to have no direct or indirect contact with Mr. Walker. You may not post about him on social media. You may not file complaints against him unless you have genuine evidence of a violation, and even then, it must go through your attorney, not directly from you." Brenda's face went white. "Your Honor, I'm the HOA president. I have a responsibility to the community." "You have a responsibility to operate within the law," the judge corrected. "The HOA board as a whole may continue to pursue legitimate concerns through proper legal channels, but you personally are enjoined from any further harassment of Mr. Walker. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 2 weeks after the restraining order was granted, I was awakened at 3 a.m. by flashing lights and the sound of sirens. I stumbled to my window to see fire trucks and police cars filling the street. My heart seized. Was my house on fire? I ran downstairs and outside, but the emergency vehicles weren't focused on my house. They were at the community center 3 blocks away. Flames poured from the windows, and firefighters were battling to contain the blaze. I stood with other neighbors who had come out to watch, all of us in various states of undress, trying to understand what was happening. It took firefighters 2 hours to extinguish the flames. By then, the community center was a total loss. The next day, the neighborhood was buzzing with speculation. The fire chief announced they were investigating the cause and expected to have answers soon. 3 days later, the police arrested Brenda Patterson for arson. According to the investigation, security footage from a neighboring business showed Brenda's car pulling into the community center parking lot at 2:30 in the morning. She had entered the building using her key as HOA president, and cameras captured her leaving 15 minutes later carrying an empty gas can. The fire started shortly after. The story that emerged in the following weeks was both sad and infuriating. Brenda had been embezzling money from the HOA for over a year. As treasurer before becoming president, she had created fake vendors and approved payments to herself. When Gary Hughes had started asking questions about the HOA's finances, Brenda had realized she was about to be caught. She had stored all the financial records at the community center, and she had apparently believed that destroying the building would destroy the evidence. What she hadn't counted on was that Gary had already made digital copies of all the questionable transactions and had reported his suspicions to the police. The fire was pointless destruction that endangered the neighborhood and eliminated a community resource. The investigation also revealed that Brenda had been the one to vandalize my beehives. Security footage from a camera at a house down the street had captured her car driving toward my house around the time of the incident, though it hadn't been clear enough to prove anything until police enhanced the images after her arrest. She had targeted me because my challenge to her authority had drawn attention to her activities and undermined her control over the board. Brenda was charged with arson, embezzlement, vandalism, and several other offenses. She pleaded guilty as part of a deal and was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to the HOA. The community center's destruction actually brought the neighborhood together in an unexpected way. Gary Hughes took over as interim HOA president, and one of the first things he did was apologize to me on behalf of the board. The HOA paid for the replacement of my 2 destroyed beehives and covered my legal fees. More than that, neighbors who had never paid attention to my beekeeping suddenly became interested. I started offering workshops on beekeeping basics, and several people asked if I could help them start their own hives. Mrs. Henderson, despite her allergy, became one of my biggest advocates, telling anyone who would listen about how the HOA had wasted time and money persecuting a neighbor who was doing meaningful work. Mission Hospital asked if I could expand my operation to increase the honey supply. With the insurance money from the vandalism and the restitution from the HOA, I was able to add 6 more hives and increase my production significantly. I hired Dave Martinez, my neighbor whose yard backed up to mine, to help with the expanded operation. He had recently retired and was looking for a project. He turned out to have a natural aptitude for beekeeping. The local newspaper ran a feature story about the whole situation, focusing on the medical honey program and how it helped patients. The publicity brought in volunteers from the community who wanted to support the work. A local garden club started a pollinator garden initiative, planting bee-friendly flowers throughout the neighborhood. Children from nearby schools toured my apiary as part of their science curriculum. What Brenda had tried to destroy ended up growing into something much bigger than I had ever imagined. My small backyard operation became a community project that educated people about the importance of pollinators and provided a vital resource to the hospital. About 8 months after Brenda's arrest, I received a letter from her. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. In careful handwriting, she had written an apology. It was long and detailed, acknowledging the harm she had caused not just to me, but to the entire community. She explained that she had been struggling financially after a divorce and had made terrible choices. She had convinced herself that she was protecting the neighborhood, when really she was just trying to maintain control and hide her crimes. She didn't ask for forgiveness, just said she wanted me to know that she understood what she had done and was sorry. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't throw it away either. I filed it with all the other documents from that difficult period. Maybe someday I would feel ready to offer forgiveness, but that day hadn't come yet. A year after the beehive vandalism, Mission Hospital honored me at their annual donor recognition event. Dr. Patel gave a presentation about the wound care program and showed before and after photos of patients who had been treated with medical-grade honey. One patient, a diabetic man named Robert who had been facing possible amputation due to a non-healing foot wound, spoke about how the honey treatments had saved his leg. "I don't know Isaac Walker personally," Robert said, "but I'm grateful every day that he keeps bees in his backyard. Those bees literally saved my foot." Standing in that hospital auditorium, surrounded by medical staff and other donors, I thought about Sarah. She would have loved this. She would have been out in the apiary with me, probably lecturing the bees about their important medical mission, making me laugh with her running commentary on the politics of the hive. The grief was still there. It probably always would be. But I had found a way to channel it into something productive, something that helped people. The bees had given me purpose when I was lost. They had connected me to my community when I had isolated myself in grief. And they had shown me that sometimes the things others see as nuisances or threats can actually be sources of healing. Gary Hughes approached me after the ceremony. "That was quite something," he said. "I wanted to let you know that the new community center is almost finished. We're planning a grand opening next month. We'd like to dedicate the community garden area to you if you're willing. We're putting in all pollinator-friendly plants." "I appreciate that, Gary, but it's not necessary." "Maybe not necessary, but deserved. What you've built here matters. And the way you handled everything with Brenda, you could have been vindictive, but you weren't. You just kept doing the work." The new community center opened on a beautiful Saturday in May. The weather was perfect, warm and sunny, with just enough breeze to keep things comfortable. The garden area was stunning, full of native plants that would bloom throughout the growing season, providing food for bees, butterflies, and other pollinators. There was a small plaque near the garden entrance: "The Isaac Walker Pollinator Garden," in appreciation for showing us that what makes a community strong is not uniformity, but the willingness to see the value in diversity. I stood there reading it with Dave beside me. "That's pretty profound for an HOA dedication plaque," he said. Gary's always had a way with words. "How are the hives doing?" "Really well. We should have a strong harvest this year. The hospital's already asking if we can supply even more honey. Apparently, word is spreading to other hospitals in the region about the program." "You thinking about expanding again?" "Maybe. I've got the space for a few more hives, but I want to make sure we can manage it properly. Quality over quantity." Dave nodded. "Smart. Hey, my daughter's interested in learning about beekeeping. She's studying environmental science at UNC Asheville. Would you mind if she shadowed us for a few weeks?" "Not at all. Always happy to teach someone who's genuinely interested." As the dedication ceremony continued, I found myself thinking about how much had changed in 2 years. What had started as Brenda's attempt to force me out of the neighborhood had transformed into something beautiful. The confrontation had forced me out of my isolation and reconnected me with my community. The publicity about the medical honey program had educated people about the importance of bees and led to real changes in how the neighborhood approached landscaping and gardening. Even the HOA had changed. Under Gary's leadership, the board had shifted from enforcement-focused to community-focused. Instead of looking for violations, they were looking for ways to support residents and build connections. The monthly meetings were actually enjoyable now, with neighbors sharing ideas and working together on projects. I didn't go to Brenda's parole hearings when they came up. I didn't write letters either supporting or opposing her early release. That chapter was closed for me. She had done real harm, and she was facing the consequences. But I also recognized that her actions, terrible as they were, had ultimately led to positive changes. Not because of what she intended, but because of how the community had responded. That summer, my hives produced the best honey harvest I had ever seen. The combination of the new pollinator gardens throughout the neighborhood and ideal weather conditions meant the bees had thrived. Dave and I spent long days extracting honey, filling jars for the hospital, and setting aside special batches for the farmers market and local food co-op. The hospital's wound care program had grown significantly. They were now treating patients from all over western North Carolina with the medical-grade honey. Dr. Patel told me they were publishing research papers about their outcomes and presenting at national conferences. Hospitals in other states were reaching out to learn about the program and find their own local honey suppliers. "You started something important, Isaac," Rebecca said during one of my honey deliveries. "This is changing how we think about wound care, and it's bringing medical care back to its roots, using natural substances that have been healing people for thousands of years." On the 3rd anniversary of Sarah's death, I went out to the hives early in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. The bees were just starting to emerge for the day's work, the foragers heading out to find flowers while the house bees attended to the young and maintained the hive. "We did good, Sarah," I said quietly. "I think you'd be proud." A bee landed on my hand, cleaned her antennae, and then took off toward the garden. I watched her fly away and felt something in my chest ease. The grief would never entirely go away, but it had transformed into something I could carry without being crushed by it. My phone buzzed with a text from Dave. Got a call from someone in Charlotte asking about setting up hives for their hospital program. You interested in consulting? I smiled and typed back, Sure, let's talk about it. As I walked back to the house, I could hear the sound of my 10 hives humming in the morning sun. 10 hives meant close to 500,000 bees, all working together, all contributing to something larger than themselves. They had given me purpose when I needed it most. They had connected me to my community and to Sarah's legacy of caring for others. Brenda had tried to take that away, motivated by greed and a need for control. She had failed, and in failing, she had inadvertently helped create something even better than what existed before. The pollinator gardens, the community engagement, the expanded hospital program, the education initiatives, all of it had grown from the conflict she started. I thought about the letter she had written, her attempt at apology and accountability. Maybe someday I would feel ready to respond, to offer some kind of forgiveness. But for now, I was content to focus on the work, on the bees, and on the good that was growing from all that had happened. The Willow Creek community had learned something important through this whole experience. We had learned that knee-jerk reactions to things we don't understand can cause real harm. We had learned that one person's abuse of authority can ripple through an entire community. And we had learned that resilience and healing often come from unexpected places, like a backyard full of beehives producing honey that saves lives. As I sat down at my kitchen table with my morning coffee, I looked out at the yard where Sarah and I had once planned to plant a vegetable garden. The hives stood where the tomatoes and peppers were supposed to go. Life had taken a different direction than we planned, but it was still a good direction. My phone rang. It was Gary Hughes. Isaac, sorry to bother you so early, but I wanted to give you a heads up. We're getting a new family moving in next month to the house 2 doors down from you. I mentioned your bees to them during the showing, just to make sure there wouldn't be any issues. Turns out the husband is an entomologist. He was excited to hear about your operation. I laughed. Well, that's a change from Brenda's reaction. No kidding. Listen, the HOA board wants to update our covenants to explicitly protect agricultural activities like beekeeping, gardening for market sales, that kind of thing. We're going to put it to a community vote next month. I wanted to make sure you'd be okay with us using your situation as an example of why the change is needed. Of course, whatever helps. After we hung up, I sat for a while longer, watching the morning light spread across the yard. The bees were in full force now, streaming in and out of the hives. Each one knew its job and did it without complaint. Each one contributed to the survival and success of the whole. There was something profound in that simplicity. No bee was trying to control or dominate the others. No bee was embezzling from the communal stores. They worked together because that's what kept them alive. Maybe human communities could learn something from that. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Mrs. Henderson standing there with a plate of cookies. Good morning, Isaac. I made these for you and Dave. Thought you might like a snack for when you're working with the hives. That's very kind, Mrs. Henderson. Thank you. It's the least I can do. I never properly thanked you for how you handled everything with Brenda. She used my allergy as a weapon, and I felt terrible about it. You could have been angry with me, but you weren't. You weren't responsible for her actions. No, but I should have spoken up sooner. I should have told her to leave you alone from the beginning. I was just trying to avoid conflict, and that meant you had to deal with her harassment alone. It worked out in the end, she smiled. It did, didn't it? Who would have thought that horrible situation would lead to all this good? The garden, the community programs, the hospital work. You turned something ugly into something beautiful. After she left, I took the cookies out to the garage where Dave was already setting up for the day's work. We had a big extraction session planned. The supers were full, and we needed to get the honey processed and jarred for the hospital's next shipment. Mrs. Henderson brought cookies, I said, setting the plate down. That woman makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the state, Dave said. Okay, I've got the extractor set up. You want to start pulling frames? We fell into our routine, working in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional conversation. The smell of honey filled the air, sweet and complex. Each hive's honey tasted slightly different depending on what flowers the bees had visited. The spring honey was light and floral. The summer honey was darker and more robust. As we worked, I thought about how much I had learned in 3 years of beekeeping. Not just about bees, but about resilience, community, and purpose. The bees had taught me that even after devastating losses, you could rebuild. You could start over. You could create something new and valuable. They had also taught me about the importance of each individual's contribution to the whole. Every bee mattered. Every bit of nectar brought back to the hive mattered. Success came from thousands of small actions, repeated consistently, all working toward a common goal. "You ever regret getting into this?" Dave asked as we loaded another frame into the extractor. "Not for a second. Even with everything that happened with Brenda, I wouldn't change it. This saved me, Dave. After Sarah died, I was lost. The bees gave me something to care about again." "I get that. After I retired, I felt pretty aimless. This work, it makes me feel useful again. Like I'm part of something important." By the end of the day, we had extracted over 80 pounds of honey. We carefully strained and jarred it, labeling each jar with the date and batch number. The hospital required meticulous record-keeping for their medical honey program, tracking everything from the location of the hives to the processing methods. As Dave helped me load the jars into my truck for tomorrow's delivery, he said, "You know what's crazy? Brenda thought she was protecting the neighborhood from your bees, but the bees were never the danger. She was." He was right. The real threat to the community hadn't been the insects that pollinated flowers and made honey. It had been the person who abused her authority, manipulated others with fear, and ultimately committed crimes to cover her tracks. That night, I video called with my sister Rachel in Oregon. She had been my rock during the worst of the situation with Brenda, always available to listen when I needed to vent. "How's everything going?" she asked. "Really good. We had a huge harvest today. The hives are thriving." "And the neighborhood situation?" "Settled. The new covenants are going to protect agricultural activities. The community garden is amazing. Things are actually better than they were before all the drama started." "I'm glad to hear that. You sound happy, Isaac. Really happy, not just putting on a brave face." "I think I am happy. Or at least, I'm finding my way back to it. It's different than before Sarah died. But it's real. She'd be so proud of you. The way you turned your grief into something that helps people, that's exactly what she would have wanted." After we hung up, I went out to check on the hives one last time before bed. The bees were settling in for the night, their activity slowing as darkness fell. I stood in the quiet backyard, listening to their gentle hum, and felt grateful for everything that had brought me to this moment. The journey from grief to purpose hadn't been straightforward. It had involved unexpected challenges, confrontations I never wanted, and pain I wouldn't wish on anyone. But it had also brought me back to life, reconnected me with my community, and given me work that made a real difference. Tomorrow, I would deliver honey to the hospital. Next week, I would teach a beekeeping class to a group of interested neighbors. Next month, I might consult with the hospital in Charlotte about starting their own program. The future stretched out before me, full of possibility. Standing in my backyard in Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by the hives that had saved me and the community that had rallied around me, I realized something important. Brenda had tried to paint me as a danger to the neighborhood. She had tried to make my bees into villains. But in the end, she had inadvertently shown everyone what real danger looked like, and it wasn't the honeybees working in harmony to create something sweet and healing. The real danger had been fear, control, and dishonesty. And the real strength had been in honesty, persistence, and community. I had learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when you're standing alone, is always worth it. Because you're never really alone. There are always people who will see the truth and stand with you. As I walked back inside, I glanced at the photo of Sarah on the mantel. In the picture, she was laughing, her whole face lit up with joy. I could almost hear her voice saying what she always said when I faced a challenge. "You've got this, Isaac. Just keep going." I had kept going. Through grief, through harassment, through confrontation and conflict, I had kept going. And I had come out the other side stronger, more connected, and more purposeful than before. The bees had been worth fighting for. The work had been worth defending. And the life I was building in Sarah's memory was worth every difficult moment it had taken to get here. In the end, that's what mattered. Not Brenda's crimes or her misguided crusade, not the temporary setbacks or the destroyed hives. What mattered was that I had found a way to turn grief into growth, to transform loss into legacy, and to create something that helped heal others while healing myself. The bees continued their work, oblivious to the human drama that had swirled around them. They collected nectar, made honey, and pollinated flowers. They did what bees have done for millions of years, following ancient instincts and working for the good of the hive. And I would continue my work, tending the hives, supplying the hospital, teaching others, and building a life that honored Sarah's memory. The HOA drama was behind me now, a closed chapter in a longer story that was still being written. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I could hear the faint hum of the hives through my bedroom window. It was a sound that used to remind me of my loneliness, of all the dreams Sarah and I had shared that would never come true. But now it reminded me of resilience, of community, of purpose found in unexpected places. The bees hummed on, making honey in the darkness, and I slept peacefully, knowing that tomorrow would bring more work, more purpose, and more opportunities to make a difference. That was enough. That was everything.